The skull had been sitting on the warlord's throne for 11 years. It was a human skull. It was clean and white and polished. It had been placed in a special alcove built into the right armrest of the great throne, where the warlord could rest his hand upon it whenever he wished. He did this often. He liked the feel of it beneath his fingers. He liked what it represented. It represented his greatest victory. It represented the day he had killed a human and proven that humans could die like any other species. Warlord Grask of the Tharnik Dominion had taken the skull from the body of a human soldier 11 years ago, during the only battle the Tharnik had ever fought against humanity. The battle had been small, a border skirmish, a single human scout ship against 3 Tharnik cruisers. The human ship had been destroyed, but before it died, it had taken one of the Tharnik cruisers with it, and it had killed 200 Tharnik soldiers in the process. The human crew had fought with a ferocity that the Tharnik had not expected. When the Tharnik had finally boarded the dying human vessel, they had found only one survivor. A single human soldier, wounded out of ammunition, surrounded. The human had not surrendered. The human had fought with a knife until the Tharnik had finally killed him. Warlord Grask had been impressed. He had ordered the human's body brought to him. He had personally removed the skull. He had kept it as a trophy. A reminder of the day his forces had defeated a human, even a single one, even at great cost. For 11 years, the skull had sat on his throne. For 11 years, Grask had told the story of how he had defeated the human soldier. The story had grown in the telling. In the most recent versions, Grask himself had killed the human in single combat. This was not true. The human had been killed by a dozen Tharnik soldiers after a prolonged fight. But Grask was a warlord, and warlords were entitled to embellish their victories. The skull had become famous throughout the Tharnik Dominion. It was the only piece of evidence that the Tharnik had ever defeated a human. Other species feared humans. Other species avoided conflict with Earth. But the Tharnik had a human skull on their warlord's throne. The Tharnik, the story went, were not afraid of humans. The Tharnik had killed one. The Tharnik had the proof. Tonight, Grask sat on his throne in his great hall, surrounded by his court. He was hosting a feast for his senior commanders. There was food and drink and music. There were trophies displayed throughout the hall, evidence of Grask's many conquests. But the centerpiece of the hall, the trophy that everyone came to see, was the human skull on the throne. Grask rested his hand on the skull as he watched his court celebrate. He was an old warlord now. He had ruled the Tharnik Dominion for 40 years. He had conquered 11 systems. He had killed thousands of enemies. He was nearing the end of his life. He had been thinking recently about his legacy. He wanted to be remembered as the greatest warlord in Tharnik history. He believed the human skull would help secure that memory. He did not know that tonight. His legacy would be decided in a way he had never anticipated. It began with a transmission. A communications officer entered the great hall. He approached the throne nervously. He bowed deeply. "Warlord Grask, we have received a transmission. It is addressed to you personally. It is from Earth." The hall went quiet. The music stopped. The conversations died. Everyone looked at the communications officer, then they looked at Grask. "From Earth," Grask said. "Why would Earth transmit to me?" "I do not know, Warlord. The transmission is brief. It is text only. May I read it to you?" "Read it." The communications officer activated his data pad. He read the message aloud. "Warlord Grask of the Tharnik Dominion. 11 years ago, you killed a human soldier named Sergeant David Kane. You took his skull as a trophy. You have displayed it on your throne ever since. We are writing to inform you that we are coming to retrieve it. We will arrive at your world in 3 days. You will return the skull to us. You will also surrender yourself to face justice for the desecration of a human soldier's remains. If you comply, no harm will come to your people. If you refuse, the consequences will be severe. This is your only warning, Earth Defense Command." The hall was silent. Then Grask laughed. He laughed loudly. The sound echoed through the great hall. His court, taking their cue from their warlord, began to laugh as well. Soon the entire hall was laughing. "They want the skull back," Grask said when the laughter had died down. "After 11 years, they want their dead soldier's skull back, and they think they can demand my surrender." He laughed again. "Communications officer, send a reply. Tell Earth that the skull is mine. Tell them I killed the human myself in single combat. Tell them that if they come to my world, I will add more human skulls to my collection. Tell them the Tharnik Dominion does not fear humans. We have proof. We killed one." "Yes, Warlord." The communications officer left to send the reply. The feast resumed. The music played. The court celebrated. Grask rested his hand on the skull and felt proud. Earth had demanded his surrender. He had refused. He had defied the species that everyone else feared. His legacy was secure. He was a fool. He just did not know it yet. 2,000 light-years away on Earth, Captain Marcus Kane received the Warlord's reply. He had been waiting for it. He had known with near certainty what the Warlord would say. He had studied Warlord Grask for the past year. He had read every intelligence file Earth possessed about the Tharnik leader. He had analyzed the Warlord's psychology, his history, his patterns of behavior. He had known that Grask would refuse the demand. He had known that Grask would respond with mockery and defiance. The Warlord was too proud to do anything else. But Earth's protocol required that the demand be made first. Earth always gave its enemies a chance to comply peacefully before resorting to force. It was a matter of principle. It was also a matter of law. The Galactic Council required that formal demands be issued before military action. Earth followed the law, even when it knew the law would be ignored. Marcus sat in his quarters aboard the Earth warship Endurance. He held a photograph in his hands. It was a photograph of his father, Sergeant David Kane. The photograph had been taken when Marcus was 14 years old, 2 years before his father died. In the photograph, David Kane was smiling. He was wearing his Earth Defense Force uniform. He had his arm around Marcus's shoulders. They were both laughing at something. It had been a good day. Marcus could not remember what they had been laughing about, but he remembered that it had been a good day. That had been the kind of father David Kane had been. A man who laughed. A man who made his son laugh. A man who came home from his deployments and threw himself into being a father, making up for the months he had been away. A man who had taught Marcus how to fish, how to fix an engine, how to stand up for himself, how to be honest, how to be brave. And then when Marcus was 16, the news had come. David Kane's ship had been attacked. The ship had been a survey vessel conducting a peaceful biological survey near the Tharnik border. The Tharnik had attacked without warning. The ship had been destroyed. David Kane had been the last survivor. He had fought to the end. He had killed 200 Tharnik soldiers before they finally overwhelmed him. The Earth Defense Force had recovered most of the bodies from the destroyed ship, but not David Kane's. His body had been taken by the Tharnik. For years, Earth had not known what had happened to it. Then, through intelligence channels, they had learned the truth. The Tharnik warlord had taken David Kane's skull as a trophy. He had displayed it on his throne. He had been telling the story of how he had defeated a human for 11 years. Marcus had been 17 when he learned what had happened to his father's remains. He had been consumed by rage and grief. He had vowed then that he would one day recover his father's skull and bring it home. He had joined the Earth Defense Force the moment he was old enough. He had trained relentlessly. He had specialized in special operations. He had risen through the ranks. He had become one of Earth's finest officers. And throughout his entire career, he had been working toward this moment. He had requested every year that Earth Defense Command authorize a mission to recover his father's remains. For years, the request had been denied. The Tharnik Dominion had been too powerful. The political situation had been too delicate. The mission had been too risky. But things had changed. Earth had grown stronger. The Tharnik Dominion had grown weaker. The political situation had shifted. And finally, this year, Earth Defense Command had approved the mission. They had given Marcus the resources he needed: 400 warships, a specialized recovery team, the authority to do whatever was necessary to bring David Kane home. Marcus had insisted on one condition. He wanted to give the warlord a chance to return the remains peacefully. He did not want to destroy a world if he did not have to. He did not want to kill thousands of Tharnik civilians who had nothing to do with his father's death. He wanted to offer Grask a choice first. Earth Defense Command had agreed. They had issued the formal demand. Grask had refused, as Marcus had known he would. Now Marcus would go down to the planet personally. He would give Grask one final chance face to face, and if Grask refused again, the fleet would act. Marcus put down the photograph of his father. He stood up. He began to put on his armor. He was going to go down to the planet alone. It was a risk. Grask could kill him, but Marcus had calculated the risk carefully. He believed that confronting Grask in person alone would be more effective than any amount of military threat delivered from orbit. He believed that Grask, faced with a human who was willing to die, would understand the seriousness of the situation in a way that abstract threats could not convey. He was betting his life on his understanding of the warlord's psychology. He was betting that Grask, when forced to look into the eyes of the son of the man he had killed, would be unable to maintain his pride. He was betting that the truth, delivered in person, would crack the warlord's armor. It was a dangerous bet, but Marcus had spent his entire adult life preparing for this moment. He trusted his preparation. He trusted his understanding. He trusted that he would succeed. He finished putting on his armor. He picked up his helmet. He looked at the photograph of his father one more time. "I am coming for you, Dad," he said quietly. "I am bringing you home, I promise." He put on his helmet. He went to the launch bay. He boarded the pod that would take him down to the planet. 3 days later, the Earth fleet arrived. It did not arrive the way Grask had expected. He had expected a fleet of warships. He had expected an orbital bombardment. He had expected a military assault that his own forces could resist, at least for a while, giving him the chance to die gloriously in battle and cement his legacy as a warlord who had stood against Earth. That was not what happened. What happened was that a single ship appeared in orbit above the Tharnik homeworld. It was not a large ship. It was a medium-sized vessel, sleek and dark, of a design that the Tharnik sensors did not recognize. It took up a stationary position in high orbit. It did not fire weapons. It did not make threats. It simply held position. Then it deployed something. Tharnik sensors detected a small object launched from the Earth ship. The object descended through the atmosphere. It was moving slowly, deliberately on a trajectory that would bring it down directly at Grask's palace. The Tharnik air defense systems tracked it. They prepared to destroy it. But Grask, watching from his throne room, gave an order. "Do not destroy it. Let it land. I want to see what Earth has sent." The object descended. It landed in the great courtyard of Grask's palace just outside the Great Hall. The Tharnik soldiers surrounded it cautiously. The object was a small pod approximately 2 meters tall. It sat in the courtyard silent for several minutes. Then it opened. A figure stepped out. The figure was wearing a suit of armor. The armor was dark, almost black. It absorbed light. It made the figure look like a shadow. The figure was approximately human-sized. It carried no visible weapons. It stepped out of the pod and stood in the courtyard and looked toward the Great Hall. The Tharnik soldiers aimed their weapons at the figure. They waited for orders. Grask came out of the Great Hall to see the figure for himself. He walked into the courtyard, surrounded by his personal guards. He looked at the armored figure. The figure looked back at him. They were perhaps 20 meters apart. "Who are you?" Grask demanded. "What are you?" The figure reached up and removed its helmet. Beneath the helmet was a human face, a man. He had short, dark hair. He had brown eyes. He had a hard face lined with experience. He looked to be perhaps 40 human years old. He looked at Grask with an expression that was calm and cold. "Warlord Grask," the human said. His voice was carried by a translator built into his armor. "My name is Captain Marcus Kane. I am here for my father's skull." Grask stared at the human. "Your father?" "Sergeant David Kane. The soldier you killed 11 years ago, the soldier whose skull you have been displaying on your throne. He was my father. I was 16 years old when he died. I am here to bring him home." Grask laughed, but the laugh was less confident than it had been 3 days earlier. There was something about this human that unsettled him. The human had arrived alone. The human had walked into the heart of Grask's power, surrounded by Grask's soldiers with no visible weapons and no apparent fear. The human was either insane or he had a plan. Grask did not know which. "Captain Kane," Grask said, "you have come a long way to retrieve a skull. You have come alone into my palace, surrounded by my soldiers. I could kill you right now. I could add your skull to my collection. Father and son together on my throne. What makes you think you will leave this place alive?" "I never said I expected to leave alive, Warlord. I said I came for my father's skull. Whether I leave alive is a separate question." "You are willing to die for a skull?" "I am willing to die to bring my father home, yes." Grask studied the human. The human was not bluffing. The human was genuinely prepared to die. This was the same quality that Grask had observed in the human soldier 11 years ago. The willingness to fight, to die, for something larger than survival. It was a quality that Grask, as a warlord, respected. It was also a quality that he was beginning to understand made humans extremely dangerous. "Captain Kane, I will make you an offer. I respect your courage. I respect that you have come for your father. I will give you a chance. Fight me. In single combat. If you win, you may take the skull and leave. If you lose, your skull joins your father's on my throne. Are you willing to fight me, human?" "No." Grask blinked. "No." I am not here to fight you, Warlord. I am not here for personal glory. I am not here to prove anything. I am here to retrieve my father's remains. I have given you the opportunity to return them peacefully. You have refused, so now I will tell you what happens next. What happens next? The human Captain Kane looked at Grask. His expression did not change. His voice remained calm. Warlord Grask, the ship in orbit above your world is not a warship. It is a transport. It carries no weapons capable of threatening your planet. I am the only person aboard it aside from the pilot. I came here alone, as I said. I came to give you one final chance to do the right thing, to return my father's remains peacefully, to avoid what is coming. And what is coming? In orbit, just beyond the range of your sensors, there is a second fleet. It arrived 6 hours ago. It consists of 400 Earth warships. It is currently cloaked. It is waiting for my signal. If I give the signal, or if I die, or if I do not return to my ship within the next hour, the fleet will decloak and begin operations against your world. Your air defense systems will be destroyed first, then your military installations, then your government facilities. Then, if necessary, your population centers. The fleet has the firepower to render your world uninhabitable within 6 hours. Grask felt something cold move through him. You are bluffing. I am not bluffing, Warlord. I never bluff. My father did not bluff either. When he told your forces that they would pay for boarding his ship, he was not bluffing. He killed 200 of your soldiers and destroyed one of your cruisers before he died. He was one man. I have 400 warships. Do the math, Warlord. Calculate what is about to happen to your world. The Tharnik soldiers around the courtyard were listening. Grask could see the uncertainty spreading among them. They had heard the stories about humans. They had heard about the human soldier who had killed 200 Tharnik before dying. They were looking at this human who had walked into their palace alone, and they were beginning to understand that he was not afraid because he did not need to be afraid. Grask tried to maintain his composure. Captain Kane, even if what you say is true, even if you have 400 warships in orbit, you came down here alone. You are in my power. If I kill you, I deny Earth the satisfaction of recovering anything. I die a warlord who defied Earth to the end. You could do that, Warlord. You could kill me. And then Earth would destroy your world, and your people would die, and you would be remembered not as a great warlord, but as the fool who got his entire civilization killed over a skull. Is that the legacy you want? To be the warlord who destroyed the Tharnik Dominion because he was too proud to return the remains of a dead enemy. Grask was silent. Or, Captain Kane continued, you could make a different choice. You could return my father's skull. You could surrender yourself to face justice as Earth has demanded. And in exchange, your world would be spared. Your people would live. The Tharnik Dominion would continue. You personally would face consequences, yes. But your civilization would survive. Your people would not pay for your pride. You are asking me to surrender, to give up, to abandon my honor. Warlord Grask, I'm asking you to choose between your pride and your people. That is the only choice that matters here. Your honor, your legacy, your reputation, none of these things matter if your world is a smoking ruin and your people are dead. A real leader protects his people. A real leader puts his people above his own ego. The question I am asking you is simple. Are you a real leader, or are you just a proud old warlord who would rather see his world destroyed than admit he made a mistake? The courtyard was completely silent. Every Tharnik soldier was watching. Every member of Grask's court who had followed him out of the hall was watching. They were all waiting to see what their warlord would do. Among the watching soldiers was a young Tharnik officer named Vethik. He was 20 years old. He had grown up hearing the stories about the human skull on the warlord's throne. He had believed his entire life that the Tharnik were strong, that the Tharnik did not fear humans, that the Tharnik had proven their superiority by killing a human and keeping his skull as a trophy. Now Vethik watched a single human stand alone in the courtyard, surrounded by Tharnik soldiers, and calmly explained that 400 warships were waiting to destroy the entire Tharnik world. Vethik watched the human show no fear. He watched the human offer the warlord a choice. He watched the human speak with the absolute confidence of someone who held all the power, even though he appeared on the surface to be completely vulnerable. Vethik understood in that moment that everything he had been told about humans was wrong. The Tharnik had not proven their superiority 11 years ago. They had killed a single human scout at the cost of 200 Tharnik lives and an entire cruiser. That was not a victory. That was a catastrophe disguised as a victory. And now the dead human son had come with 400 warships to collect the remains and to make the Tharnik pay for their arrogance. Vethek was not the only soldier thinking these thoughts. All around the courtyard, Tharnik soldiers were reconsidering everything they had believed about their own strength and about the humans they had been taught to disdain. The human skull on the throne had been a symbol of Tharnik pride. Now it was becoming a symbol of Tharnik foolishness. The warlord had kept a trophy that he should have returned. He had told a story of victory that was actually a story of disaster. And now the consequences of that arrogance were standing in the courtyard, wearing dark armor, holding the power of 400 warships in his hands. Grask looked at the human, he looked at his soldiers. He looked at the palace he had ruled for 40 years. He thought about his people. He thought about his legacy. He thought about the choice he was being asked to make. He was an old warlord. He had spent his entire life pursuing glory and conquest. He had built his identity around being feared, being strong, being undefeated. The human skull on his throne had been the ultimate symbol of that identity, the proof that the Tharnik did not fear even humans. But now, faced with the reality of what his pride would cost, he found himself uncertain. He did not want to surrender. Every instinct in his body rebelled against the idea, but he also did not want to be the warlord who destroyed his own civilization. He did not want his people to die because of his ego. He thought about the young soldiers in the courtyard, soldiers like Vethek, whose names he did not know, but whose lives depended on his decision. He thought about the civilians in the cities, the Tharnik children who were sleeping in their beds, unaware that their fate was being decided in this courtyard. He thought about the mothers and fathers and families who would all die if he chose pride over wisdom. He thought about his own children, his own grandchildren. They lived on this world. They would die too if the fleet attacked. The weight of the decision settled on him. It was the heaviest weight he had ever carried. For 40 years he had made decisions that affected the lives of others. He had sent soldiers to die in his wars of conquest. He had ordered the deaths of his enemies. He had never hesitated. He had never doubted. He had always been certain that his cause was just, that his strength was sufficient, that his decisions were correct. Now, for the first time in his life, he doubted. He doubted whether his pride was worth the lives of his people. He doubted whether his legacy as a warlord was worth the destruction of his civilization. He doubted whether the human skull on his throne had ever been worth keeping. He looked at Captain Kane. The human was waiting, patient, calm, certain. The human had given him a choice, and the human was prepared to accept either outcome. If Grask surrendered, the human would take him to Earth and spare the Tharnik world. If Grask refused, the human would die, and the fleet would attack, and the Tharnik world would burn. The choice was entirely Grask's. It was the most important choice of his life, and he was running out of time to make it. "Captain Kane," he said slowly, "if I surrender, what happens to me? You will be transported to Earth. You will face trial for the desecration of my father's remains and for the deaths of the crew of his ship, which was a non-combat vessel conducting a peaceful survey when your cruisers attacked it. You will be judged by an interstellar tribunal. The likely sentence is life imprisonment. You will not be executed. Earth does not practice execution. You will spend the rest of your life in a prison facility, but you will live, and your people will live. And the Tharnik Dominion will continue, under new leadership, hopefully wiser leadership. Life imprisonment. Yes. And if I refuse, you destroy my world. Yes. Grask closed his eyes. He stood in the courtyard for a long time. His soldiers waited. His court waited. The human waited. When Grask opened his eyes, he had made his decision. "Captain Kane, I will return your father's skull, and I will surrender myself." A murmur went through the assembled Tharnik. Some of them were relieved. Some of them were ashamed. Some of them were angry, but none of them objected. They all understood on some level that their warlord was making the right choice, the only choice that would save them. "Thank you, warlord," Captain Kane said. "You are making the right decision. Your people will remember you for this in time, not as the warlord who defied Earth, but as the warlord who chose his people over his pride. That is a better legacy than the one you were building." Grask turned to his guards. "Bring the skull." A guard hurried into the great hall. A moment later, he returned, carrying the human skull carefully in both hands. He brought it to Grask. Grask took it. He held it for a moment. The skull that had sat on his throne for 11 years, the trophy of his greatest victory, the symbol of his defiance. He looked at it. He thought about the human soldier it had belonged to. Sergeant David Kane, a man who had fought to the end, a man who had a son who had grown up and become a soldier himself and who had come 11 years later to bring his father home. Grask walked across the courtyard. He approached Captain Kane. He held out the skull. Captain Kane, here is your father. I am sorry for what I did to his remains. I did not understand 11 years ago that he was someone's father. I did not think of him as a person. I thought of him only as a trophy. I was wrong. I understand that now. Please take him home. Captain Kane took the skull. He held it carefully. He looked at it for a long moment. His calm expression flickered just slightly. For just a moment, the soldier became a son holding the remains of his father, recovered after 11 years. "Thank you, Warlord," he said quietly. "Thank you for returning him." He cradled the skull against his chest. He looked at Grask. "You have done the right thing. Now I will keep my word. Your world will be spared. The fleet will not attack. You will surrender yourself to me, and I will transport you to Earth for trial. Your people will be left in peace. A new government will be established with Earth's assistance to ensure that the Tharnik Dominion no longer threatens its neighbors. But your civilization will survive. Your people will live. That is the bargain. I will honor it." "I believe you, Captain Kane." "Then let us go. The sooner we leave, the sooner your people can begin to heal." Grask nodded. He turned to his court. He addressed them for the last time as their warlord. "My people, I have ruled you for 40 years. I have led you in many conquests. I have brought you glory and wealth and territory. But today I have brought you to the edge of destruction. My pride nearly cost you everything. I am surrendering myself to Earth to save you from the consequences of my mistake. I ask you to forgive me. I ask you to build a better future than the one I was leading you toward. I ask you to remember that strength is not the same as wisdom, and that a true leader protects his people above all else. I failed to understand this until it was almost too late. Do not make the same mistake I made. Goodbye." He walked across the courtyard to the Earth pod. He climbed inside. Captain Kane, holding his father's skull, climbed in after him. The pod sealed. It launched. It ascended through the atmosphere. It returned to the Earthship in orbit. The Earthship departed. The cloaked fleet, which had indeed been waiting in orbit, departed as well, still cloaked, never having revealed itself. The Tharnik never saw the 400 warships. They only knew that the warships had been there because Captain Kane had told them, and because the alternative to believing him had been the destruction of their world. During the journey back toward Earth, Captain Kane visited Grask in his holding cell. The cell was comfortable by prison standards. It was not a torture chamber. It was a simple room with a bed, a chair, and basic amenities. Grask was not a prisoner who needed to be broken. He was a prisoner who needed to be transported. Earth did not mistreat its prisoners. Marcus sat down in the chair across from Grask's bed. He had removed his armor. He wore a simple Earth military uniform. He held his father's skull in his hands, wrapped carefully in a protective cloth. "Warlord Grask, I wanted to speak with you before we reach Earth." "Captain Kane, what do you wish to speak about?" "My father, I want to know about his death. The real story, not the story you told your court for 11 years. The real story, how did he die?" Grask was quiet for a moment, then he spoke. He told the truth this time. "Your father fought with extraordinary courage, Captain Kane. When my cruisers attacked his vessel, he did not panic. He did not flee. He organized his crew. He fought back even though his ship was a survey vessel with minimal weapons. He destroyed one of my cruisers. I do not know how. His ship should not have had the firepower to do it. But he found a way. He killed many of my soldiers in the process. When we finally boarded his ship after it was disabled, your father was the only survivor. He had been wounded. He was out of ammunition. He was surrounded by a dozen of my soldiers. Any reasonable being would have surrendered. He did not. He drew a knife. He fought us with a knife. He killed 3 more of my soldiers before we finally killed him. He fought until his last breath. He never surrendered. He never begged. He died as a warrior." Marcus listened. His face was calm, but his eyes were wet. "That sounds like my father. He was a remarkable soldier, Captain Kane. I took his skull because I was impressed by him. I wanted to honor his courage by keeping a piece of him. That was my intention at first, to honor him. But over the years, the honor turned into something else. The skull became a trophy, a symbol of my own glory. I forgot that it had belonged to a person. I forgot that he had a family. I forgot that he had been brave and honorable. I reduced him to an object. That was my crime, not the killing. The killing was war, but the desecration, the reduction of a brave soldier to a decoration on my throne, that was wrong. I understand that now." "Why did you understand it in the end? When I confronted you in the courtyard, what changed?" Grask thought about this. "When you told me that your father was your father, Captain Kane, when you told me that you were 16 when he died, when you told me that you had spent 11 years training to come and bring him home. In that moment, your father stopped being a trophy and became a person again, a person with a son who loved him enough to cross the galaxy to recover his remains. I looked at you and I saw the cost of what I had done. Not the cost to me, the cost to you, to your family. To the boy who had grown up without his father, and who had carried this grief for 11 years. I have killed many beings in my life, Captain Kane. I have never thought much about the families they left behind. I told myself that war was war, that death was part of conquest, that the families of my enemies were not my concern. But when I looked at you, I could not tell myself those things anymore. You made it personal. You made me see what I had done. And once I saw it, I could not unsee it. I could not pretend anymore that the skull was just a trophy. It was your father. And you had come to take him home. Marcus nodded slowly. Thank you for telling me the truth, Warlord, about how he died, and about why you changed. You are welcome, Captain Kane. It is the least I can do. I cannot undo what I did to your father, but I can tell you the truth about it. I can let you know that he died as a hero. I can let you know that I have come to understand the wrongness of what I did with his remains. It is not enough, but it is what I can offer. It is enough, Warlord. It is more than I expected. They sat in silence for a moment. Captain Kane, may I ask you something? Yes. You could have destroyed my world. You had the power. You had the justification. I killed your father and desecrated his remains. By the laws of many species, you would have been entitled to take revenge on my entire civilization. Why did you not? Why did you give me a choice? Marcus considered the question. Because that is not who we are, Warlord. We are not a species that destroys civilizations for revenge. We are a species that values justice over vengeance. You committed a crime, you should face justice for that crime, but your people did not commit the crime. Your soldiers did not desecrate my father's remains. Your civilians had nothing to do with it. Why should they die for your crime? That would not be justice. That would be revenge. And revenge taken against the innocent is just another crime. So I gave you a choice. Return my father, face justice yourself, and your people would be spared, or refuse and face the consequences. You made the right choice. You chose to protect your people. That is to your credit, Warlord. It does not erase your crime, but it shows that you are capable of putting others before yourself when the choice is clear. That is more than many leaders can do. You are a strange species, Captain Kane. You cross the galaxy to recover the remains of a single soldier. You bring 400 warships to do it, and then you offer mercy to the being who wronged you. You are capable of overwhelming force and surprising restraint at the same time. I do not fully understand you. Few species do, Warlord. We are complicated. We can be terrible when we need to be. We can also be merciful when mercy is possible. The trick is knowing which is called for in any given situation. My father taught me that. He was a soldier, but he was not a killer at heart. He fought when he had to, but he never enjoyed it. He always looked for the path that caused the least harm. I am trying to be like him. I am trying to honor him by being the kind of man he was. You honor him well, Captain Kane. He would be proud of you, I think. I hope so, Warlord, I hope so. Marcus stood up. He prepared to leave the cell. Captain Kane, one more thing. Yes. When you bury your father, will you tell him that I am sorry? I know he cannot hear. I know it does not matter to him now. But will you tell him anyway, that the warlord who took his skull is sorry for what he did? Marcus looked at Grask for a long moment. I will tell him, Warlord. When I bury him, I will tell him that you are sorry. Thank you, Captain Kane. Marcus left the cell. He carried his father's skull back to his own quarters. He sat with it for a long time. He thought about everything Grask had told him. He thought about his father's death, the courage, the refusal to surrender, the knife, the last stand against impossible odds. That was his father. That was the man who had raised him. A man who fought to the end. A man who never gave up. A man who died as he had lived, with honor and courage. Marcus held the skull and he wept. He had not wept in 11 years. He had been too angry to weep. The anger had sustained him through his training, through his career, through the long years of working toward this moment. But now that the moment had come, now that he had his father back, the anger faded, and what remained was grief. Pure, clean grief. The grief of a son who had lost his father and who had finally, after 11 years, recovered enough of him to say goodbye properly. He wept for a long time, and then finally he felt something he had not felt in 11 years. He felt peace. The journey was almost over. He was bringing his father home. The Earth ship continued toward home. The Tharnik Dominion was transformed in the years that followed. With Grask gone, a new government was established. The new government, advised by Earth and the Galactic Council, abandoned the warlord system that had defined Tharnik society for centuries. They established a council-based government. They ended their wars of conquest. They withdrew from the systems they had occupied. They became, slowly, a peaceful member of the galactic community. It was not easy. Many Tharnik resented the changes. Many Tharnik missed the old days of conquest and glory. But the majority of the Tharnik people, who had grown tired of endless war and who valued their survival over abstract notions of honor, supported the transformation. Within a generation, the Tharnik Dominion had become the Tharnik Republic, a stable and peaceful civilization. Warlord Grask was tried on Earth. He was found guilty of the desecration of Sergeant David Kane's remains and of responsibility for the deaths of the crew of the survey vessel. He was sentenced to life imprisonment. He served his sentence in a council-administered facility. He lived for another 15 years. During those 15 years, Grask had time to reflect on his life. He had time to think about the choices he had made. He had time to understand the difference between the warlord he had been and the leader he could have been. He wrote his memoirs during his imprisonment. The memoirs were eventually published. They became required reading in the Tharnik education system. They served as a cautionary tale about the dangers of pride, the seduction of glory, and the importance of valuing one's people over one's ego. Grask wrote in his memoirs about the moment in the courtyard when Captain Kane had asked him whether he was a real leader or just a proud old warlord. He wrote that this question had haunted him for the rest of his life. He wrote that he wished he had been a real leader from the beginning. He wrote that he hoped future Tharnik leaders would learn from his mistake. He died in prison, an old and reflective being who had finally understood, too late, what it meant to be responsible for the lives of others. Captain Marcus Kane returned to Earth with his father's skull. He arranged for a proper burial. Sergeant David Kane was finally laid to rest, 11 years after his death, in a military cemetery on Earth. His son attended the burial. His widow, Marcus's mother, attended as well. She had waited 11 years for this moment. She had never given up hope that her husband's remains would be recovered. Earth Defense Command had promised her when David died that they would bring him home eventually. The promise had taken 11 years to fulfill, but it had been fulfilled. At the burial, Marcus Kane spoke. He talked about his father. He talked about the kind of man David Kane had been, a soldier, a husband, a father, a man who had died fighting, refusing to surrender, taking 200 enemies with him, a man who had been reduced by his killer to a trophy on a throne, a man who had now finally been brought home. Marcus also talked about the warlord. He talked about Grask. He said something that surprised the other mourners. "I do not hate Warlord Grask," Marcus said. "I did once. For 11 years I hated him. I dreamed about killing him. I joined the military partly because I wanted to be strong enough to one day go and take my father back. I trained for years. I rose through the ranks. I volunteered for the mission to retrieve my father's remains because I wanted to be the one to confront the warlord who had desecrated him. But when I finally met Grask, I found that I could not hate him the way I had expected to. He was an old being who had made a terrible mistake. He had treated my father as a trophy because he did not understand that my father was a person. When I made him understand, when I showed him that my father had a son, he changed. He chose to do the right thing. He returned my father. He surrendered himself. He saved his own people from the consequences of his pride. That does not excuse what he did. He will face justice for it, but it does mean that he was capable of growth. He was capable of understanding. He was capable of choosing his people over his ego when the choice was finally put before him clearly. That is more than many leaders are capable of. I have come to respect that, even as I condemn what he did to my father. My father would have understood this, I think. My father was a soldier, but he was not a hateful man. He fought because he had to, not because he enjoyed it. He would not have wanted me to spend my life consumed by hatred for the being who killed him. He would have wanted me to bring him home and then to move on and to live a good life. So that is what I am going to do. I have brought him home. Now I am going to move on. I am going to live a good life. I am going to honor my father not by hating his killer, but by being the kind of man he raised me to be. The mourners were moved by Marcus's words. They understood that he had found a kind of peace, not the peace of revenge, the peace of resolution, the peace of having completed the task he had set for himself and of having chosen not to let hatred define the rest of his life. Marcus Kane went on to have a long and distinguished career in the Earth military. He rose to the rank of admiral. He commanded fleets. He fought in wars. He protected Earth and its citizens. He never forgot his father. He kept a photograph of David Kane on his desk for his entire career. But he did not let his father's death consume him. He used it as motivation to protect others, not as fuel for hatred. He married, he had children. He had a son who he named David after his father. He told his son the story of his grandfather, the soldier who had died fighting, the man whose remains had been kept as a trophy for 11 years and then recovered, the grandfather his son had never met but whose legacy he carried. Marcus also told his son the story of Warlord Grask. He told his son that the warlord had done a terrible thing but had also been capable of change. He told his son that people were complicated, that enemies could become something other than enemies, that justice and mercy could coexist, that the goal was not to hate but to make the galaxy a better place, one choice at a time. His son listened. His son learned. His son grew up to be a good man like his father and his grandfather before him. The skull of Sergeant David Kane rested in its grave in the military cemetery on Earth. The grave had a simple marker. It read, "Sergeant David Kane, Earth Defense Force. He fought to the end. He came home at last, beloved husband and father. May he rest in peace." Next to the grave, in time, other Kane family members would be buried. Marcus would be buried there eventually, decades later after his long life of service. His mother, David's widow, would be buried there too. The Kane family plot would grow over the generations, a testament to a family that had served Earth and had endured loss and had found peace. The wooden bird that Marcus had carried during his mission, the small carving that all Earth soldiers carried as a reminder of home, was placed in his father's grave at the burial. It was a tradition. When a soldier was finally brought home after dying far away, a wooden bird was buried with them. The bird represented the journey home, the journey that David Kane had finally completed, 11 years after his death. Going on a journey, always coming home. David Kane had gone on a journey. He had not come home for 11 years, but finally, through the determination of his son, he had come home. The bird in his grave symbolized that completion. The journey was over. The soldier was home. The story of Sergeant David Kane and his son Marcus became well known throughout Earth and beyond. It was told as a story about many things, about the lengths a child would go to honor a parent, about the difference between justice and revenge, about the capacity of even a proud old warlord to change when confronted with the truth, about the importance of bringing the fallen home. But mostly, it was told as a story about what humans were like, about the way humans valued their dead, about the way humans would cross the galaxy to recover the remains of a single soldier, about the way humans would build an entire military operation with 400 warships just to give one family the chance to bury their loved one properly. Other species heard this story and they understood something important about humans. Humans did not forget their dead. Humans did not abandon their own. Humans would go to extraordinary lengths, would commit extraordinary resources, would risk everything to honor those who had died in their service. This made humans dangerous. It also made humans admirable. It made them a species that other species learned to treat with respect. Do not kill a human and keep their remains as a trophy. The galaxy learned this lesson from Warlord Grask. Because if you do, the human's family will come for them, and they will bring 400 warships. And they will give you a choice between returning the remains and watching your world burn. And you will choose to return the remains because the alternative is unthinkable. That was the lesson. That was the legacy. That was the message that Earth had sent to the galaxy through the actions of Captain Marcus Kane. We come for our dead, we bring them home, no matter how long it takes, no matter how far we have to travel, no matter what we have to do, we bring them home. That was the promise. That was the truth about humanity that the galaxy learned, 11 years after a single human soldier died in a border skirmish, when his son arrived at the warlord's palace to bring him home. The skull had sat on the throne for 11 years. Its owner had come back for it. And the galaxy had learned, once again, that there were some things you did not do to humans, some lines you did not cross, some trophies you did not keep. Because the humans would always come. They would always come for their own. Forever and always. Until the end of time. The wooden bird rested in the grave with the soldier who had finally come home. Its wings were spread wide. Going on a journey, always coming home, the promise had been kept. The soldier was at peace. The son had found his resolution. The warlord had learned his lesson. The galaxy had received its message. And in military cemeteries across Earth and across human space, the graves of the fallen were marked with wooden birds, each one representing a journey completed, a soldier brought home, a promise kept. The humans came for their dead. They always came. That was who they were. That was who they would always be. Until the very end of time.